Welcome to a deep dive into something I think is pretty amazing,
Oh, yeah.
your own immune system. We're going to be exploring some excerpts from an immunology textbook that you've provided
Okay.
and really kind of break down how this complex system works to keep you healthy.
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic.
I have,
I mean, the immune system is constantly defending you.
right,
And the more you understand it, the more you can kind of take control of your own health.
exactly. So today we're on a mission to make the immune system crystal clear.
Yeah.
We'll meet the key players, uncover their strategies, and even touch on how it all evolved.
Right.
I think you'll be surprised to learn that the concept of immunity has been around for centuries,
Oh, yeah.
way before microscopes or even the germ theory of disease.
You're right. The word immunity has this fascinating connection to ancient Rome.
Hmm.
Back then, it had nothing to do with fighting infections.
Mm.
Immunitas was a legal term,
Okay.
referring to the protection granted to Roman senators while they were in office. It meant they were exempt from certain laws and prosecutions.
So kind of like a get out of jail free card for politicians.
Yeah, kind of.
But how did we go from Roman senators to the human body's defense system?
It's all about protection.
Okay.
Just as Roman senators were shielded from legal troubles, our immune systems protect us from a different kind of danger,
Okay.
foreign or abnormal substances that could harm us.
So it's not just about fighting off colds and the flu.
Not at all.
No, I
It's
thought-
a much broader concept.
Okay.
The immune system deals with things like our own damaged cells,
Hmm.
thinks about rogue cells that could become cancerous, and even tackles toxins.
Wow.
It's like a constant surveillance and defense network working to keep everything in balance.
Wow, that is way more than I initially thought.
Yeah.
It sounds like a whole internal army is working 2-4 to 7 to keep us healthy.
Exactly. And this army has two main branches,
Okay.
innate immunity and adaptive immunity.
Okay, cool.
Each branch has its own unique strengths and strategies.
So innate immunity, is that our first line of defense? The one that's always ready to jump into action?
Absolutely. Think of innate immunity like a castle wall.
Right.
It provides a general barrier against any invader. It's always on guard,
Huh.
relying on these kind of pre-programmed responses.
Okay.
It doesn't need prior experience with a specific threat to know what to do. It's immediate.
Okay, so who are the soldiers on the front lines of this innate defense?
So you've got physical barriers like your skin and the linings of your nose and your gut.
Right.
Those are your first walls. Then there are chemical barriers, like enzymes in your tears and saliva that can break down invaders.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you have cellular warriors,
Uh-huh.
like phagocytes.
Right.
Those are cells that engulf and destroy invaders,
Okay.
kind of like little Batmans.
I like it.
And then you have natural killer cells,
Mm.
which can directly eliminate infected or abnormal cells.
Wow, it's an impressive defense force. But how is adaptive immunity different? What makes it adaptive?
Adaptive immunity is fascinating. Imagine those elite knights we discussed earlier.
Okay.
That's your adaptive immunity, highly trained to target specific enemies.
All right, I'm picturing those knights.
Adaptive immunity takes a bit longer to mobilize,
Okay.
but it's incredibly powerful. Why? Because it can learn and remember specific threats.
Oh.
It develops as we encounter different pathogens and can generate targeted responses to eliminate them.
Okay, so who are the key players in this adaptive immune response? What cells are we talking about?
The stars of the show are lymphocytes,
Yeah, okay.
a type of white blood cell.
Right.
You have B lymphocytes or B cells, which are responsible for producing antibodies,
Right.
and T lymphocytes or T cells,
Okay.
which have many roles in coordinating and executing the immune response.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, innate immunity is like a general alarm system,
Yes.
and then adaptive immunity is like a team of super sleuths
Yeah.
who know exactly who the bad guys are and how to take them down.
That's a great way to put it. What's amazing is that innate immunity is so ancient.
Oh, really?
You'll find it in plants, insects.
Huh.
It's been around for hundreds of millions of years.
Okay, that's mind-blowing. So plants had immune systems too. What about adaptive immunity? When did that evolutionary marvel come into play?
It's thought that adaptive immunity, with its complex lymphocytes and antibodies, evolved much later, probably in jawed vertebrates like sharks around 360 million years ago.
So sharks are swimming around with highly advanced immune systems. That's impressive. Let's delve deeper into adaptive immunity. You mentioned it has some really unique features. What makes it so effective?
Adaptive immunity really does stand out. It has these three superpowers, so to speak:
Okay.
specificity, memory, and self-tolerance.
I'm ready to be impressed. Let's start with specificity. What makes adaptive immunity so laser focused?
It's those specialized lymphocytes we talked about.
Okay.
Each one has unique receptors that can recognize a very specific part of an antigen.
Okay, remind me what an antigen is again.
An antigen is basically anything that can be recognized by the immune system.
Okay.
Think of it like a molecular tag
Okay.
that identifies something as foreign or possibly dangerous.
Okay.
And the specific parts of an antigen that lymphocytes recognize
Uh-huh.
are called epitopes or determinants.
So each lymphocyte has a receptor that's like a lock,
Yes.
and the epitope on the antigen is the key that fits that specific lock.
Exactly. And here's the really incredible part.
Yeah.
Your body has this huge army of lymphocytes, each with a slightly different receptor,
Wow.
ready to recognize a mind-boggling variety of antigens.
Right.
It's like having a key for every lock in the world.
Wait, how is that even possible? Are we born with all these different lymphocytes?
That's the magic of something called clonal selection.
Mm.
Think of it this way. Imagine you have a giant library with millions of books,
Okay.
and each book represents a different lymphocyte with a unique receptor.
Mm-hmm.
When an antigen enters your body, it's like searching for a specific book in that library.
Right.
The antigen will bind to the lymphocyte with the matching receptor,
Right.
and that lymphocyte is activated.
So it's a giant game of molecular hide and seek.
Yeah.
And the winning lymphocyte gets to clone itself and launch a targeted attack.
Precisely. And this winning lymphocyte doesn't just fight the current battle.
Right.
It also creates memory cells.
Mm.
That's the second superpower of adaptive immunity.
Memory.
Memory.
Mm. That's what keeps us protected long term, right?
Exactly. After encountering an antigen,
Yeah.
the adaptive immune system creates these memory cells that remember that specific threat.
Right.
So if the same antigen shows up again, those memory cells are ready to mount a much faster and stronger response.
Hmm.
It's like studying for a test the second time you see the material. It's much easier to remember.
And that's why vaccines work so well.
Exactly.
They give our immune system a sneak peek at a pathogen, so it's ready to fight it off before we get sick.
Exactly. Vaccines expose us to a weakened or inactive form of the pathogen, which allows our adaptive immune system to create those memory cells without us actually getting sick.
Right.
It's like a training exercise for the immune system.
So clever. Okay, we've covered specificity and memory. What about self-tolerance? That sounds pretty crucial.
It really is. Self-tolerance means that the immune system can tell the difference between your own cells and tissues
Right.
and foreign invaders.
Right.
It's what prevents it from attacking your own body.
Wait, so our own immune systems could actually turn against us?
It is possible.
Mm-hmm.
And when that happens, it can lead to autoimmune diseases.
Right.
Thankfully, we have self-tolerance mechanisms to prevent that from happening most of the time.
Okay, so how does our immune system know which cells are friendly and which ones are foes?
It's a complex process
Right.
involving multiple checks and balances.
Okay.
For example, lymphocytes that recognize self-antigens too strongly
Uh-huh.
are eliminated during their development.
Mm.
And there are regulatory T cells
Okay.
that suppress immune responses that might target our own tissues.
So it's like our immune system has a built-in safety mechanism
Yes.
to prevent friendly fire.
Very impressive.
Yeah.
Are there any other cool things about adaptive immunity that we should know about?
There are. Adaptive immunity is systemic,
Okay.
meaning even if a response starts in one part of your body, it can protect your entire system.
Hmm.
That's why a vaccine injected in your arm can protect you from a respiratory virus.
That makes sense. It's like having a network of immune cells patrolling our bodies ready to respond wherever they're needed.
Exactly. And another crucial feature is that adaptive immunity is regulated. There are built-in feedback loops to make sure that the immune response is strong enough to fight infection,
Okay.
but it doesn't go overboard and cause damage to your tissues.
It's like a thermostat for our immune system, keeping everything balanced. But how does this intricate dance between innate and adaptive immunity actually work in practice?
To understand that, we need to take a closer look at the two main arms of adaptive immunity: humoral immunity and cell-mediated immunity. Okay, humoral immunity. Doesn't it have something to do with antibodies?
You got it.
Okay.
Humoral immunity focuses on those Y-shaped proteins called antibodies
Right.
that circulate in our blood and other fluids.
Right. Antibodies. I remember learning about them in school. They're like tiny guided missiles that seek and destroy invaders.
That's a great way to think about it.
Yeah.
And the cells responsible for producing these antibodies are the B lymphocytes we talked about earlier.
So how does it all work? How do B cells know which antibodies to produce?
Each B cell has a unique type of antibody on its surface,
Mm-hmm.
which acts as a receptor.
Right.
When an antigen enters the body and binds to that antibody receptor,
Yeah.
the B cell is activated.
So it's like that lock and key thing again. The antigen fits into the matching antibody on the B cell, and that triggers the B cell to take action.
Exactly. And once activated, that B cell will multiply
Okay.
and differentiate into plasma cells,
Right.
which are essentially antibody factories,
Uh-huh.
churning out tons of antibodies specific to that antigen.
It's really impressive how our bodies create these specialized weapons to fight off invaders.
It is remarkable. And humoral immunity is especially effective at fighting off extracellular microbes,
Okay.
those that are hanging out outside our cells in the blood tissues or on mucosal surfaces like the lining of your gut.
So things like bacteria and viruses that haven't actually infected our cells yet?
Precisely. Antibodies can bind to these microbes,
Okay.
neutralize them,
Uh-huh.
and mark them for destruction by other immune cells.
So it's like the antibodies are calling in for backup,
Yeah,
making it easier for the innate immune cells to come in and clean up the mess.
that's a great analogy. Antibodies are kind of like the intelligence officers of the immune system,
I like it.
gathering information and guiding the other troops.
This humoral immunity stuff is making a lot more sense now, but what about cell-mediated immunity? What's its role?
Cell-mediated immunity is all about those T lymphocytes.
Okay.
They're the specialists in dealing with threats the humoral immunity can't handle as easily.
Okay, what kind of threats are we talking about?
Think about microbes that have already invaded your cells,
Okay.
like viruses or certain bacteria that can hide inside macrophages.
Right. It's like those microbes have holed up in a fortress where the antibody missiles can't reach them.
That's a perfect analogy. And that's where T cells come into play.
Okay.
They're the hand-to-hand combat specialists of the immune
You're
system,
right.
capable of directly targeting and eliminating infected cells.
So T cells are like the assassins of the immune system. I'm picturing some serious action movie scenes.
It's easy to visualize, isn't it?
Yeah.
T cells are incredibly powerful and precise.
Okay.
We'll focus on two main types for now,
Okay.
helper T cells and cytotoxic T lymphocytes, or CTLs for short.
Let's start with helper T cells. What exactly do they help with?
Helper T cells are like the masterminds behind the immune response.
Okay.
They don't directly kill infected cells,
Right.
but rather orchestrate the attack by releasing signaling molecules called cytokines.
So they're like the generals issuing orders and coordinating the troops.
Exactly. These cytokines can activate macrophages,
Mm-hmm.
making them more efficient at killing those ingested microbes.
Right.
They can also help B cells produce more antibodies.
So helper T cells are basically boosting both the innate and humoral immune responses.
Yeah.
Real team players.
They are. And they're also vital for activating CTLs, the other main type of T cell.
Right, the CTLs, the assassins.
CTLs are the specialists in directly killing infected cells.
Okay.
They have this amazing ability to recognize infected cells
Uh-huh.
and deliver a lethal blow,
Wow.
destroying both the cell and any microbes hiding inside.
It's like they're going door to door, eliminating the enemy one by one.
It's a very targeted approach.
Yeah.
And CTLs are also important for getting rid of cancer cells that have abnormal proteins.
So they're not just fighting infections, but also helping to prevent cancer. Incredible. But hold on. How do T cells even see that a cell is infected in the first place?
That's a great question. Unlike antibodies that can bind to free-floating antigens,
Right.
T cells need to be shown the antigen.
Okay.
It has to be presented to them on the surface of other cells.
Presented on the surface. What does that even mean?
It means that the antigen has to be broken down into smaller pieces called peptides
Hmm.
and displayed on special molecules called MHC molecules,
Okay.
which are found on the surface of most cells in our bodies.
So it's like the infected cell is holding up a wanted poster with a picture of the antigen on it,
Yes.
and the T cell can then recognize it and take action.
That's an excellent analogy.
Mm.
And that's how T cells can differentiate between healthy and infected cells.
Okay, I think I'm starting to grasp the big picture here. We've got innate immunity as our first line of defense,
Yes.
and then adaptive immunity with its two branches,
Right.
humoral immunity powered by antibodies, and cell-mediated immunity led by the T cells.
You've got it.
Yeah.
And remember, these two systems are constantly communicating and working together
Right.
to make sure your body is protected from all sorts of threats.
It's truly fascinating. It's like our bodies are hosting this epic battle between good and evil.
Yeah.
And luckily for us, we have an amazing defense force on our side. This has been incredibly insightful, but I'm eager to hear more about how these different immune players actually work together in action.
I agree. We'll get into the specifics of how humoral immunity works, starting with those antibody molecules.
Sounds like a plan. We'll dive into that right after this.
All right, we're back and ready to learn more about those antibody powerhouses you mentioned earlier. They sound like tiny but mighty weapons.
Yeah, they really are. Antibodies are the key players in humoral immunity.
Okay.
They have this amazing ability to neutralize microbes, tag them for destruction, and even trigger a chain reaction of proteins that can directly wipe out invaders.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Yeah.
Break down the science of antibodies for me. What are these molecules made of, and how do they actually work their magic?
Antibodies, which are also called immunoglobulins, are basically Y-shaped proteins.
Each antibody has a special region at the tips of the Y that binds specifically to a particular antigen, kind of like a lock and key.
Right, we talked about that lock and key idea before. But what happens after an antibody binds to its target? How does that actually protect us?
Well, there are several ways antibodies can help eliminate threats.
Okay.
First, they can neutralize microbes by directly blocking their ability to bind to our cells. Imagine them as tiny shields surrounding a virus and preventing it from attaching to a cell.
So it's like they're disarming the enemy before it can even launch an attack?
Precisely. Neutralization is a crucial function of antibodies, especially when it comes to viruses.
Right.
It's one of the main goals of vaccination,
Mm,
to trigger the production of neutralizing antibodies that can provide that immediate protection if you ever encounter the real pathogen.
that makes a lot of sense. What are some of the other ways antibodies work?
They can also act as opsonins.
Opsonins.
That means they coat microbes and make them more appealing to phagocytes, those Pac-Man-like cells we talked about earlier.
Opsonins. It
Uh,
sounds like you're describing some kind of delicious immune system snack.
Maybe not a snack,
Right.
but you're right about making microbes more appealing.
Okay.
Phagocytes have receptors that recognize specific parts of antibody molecules.
Hmm.
When antibodies coat a microbe, they essentially put a big "eat me" sign on it,
Okay.
making it much easier for phagocytes to gobble it up.
So antibodies are basically turning those microbes into irresistible targets.
Exactly. But antibodies have even more tricks up their sleeves.
Okay, go on.
They can also activate the complement system.
The complement system, I don't think we've talked about that yet.
It's pretty amazing.
Okay.
The complement system is a group of proteins that circulate in your blood in an inactive form.
Huh?
When they're activated, they can directly kill microbes by punching holes in their membranes.
Mm.
They can also enhance the whole opsonization process, making those microbes even more attractive to phagocytes.
Wow, so antibodies are basically triggering a cascade of destruction. They sound pretty powerful.
They are. And to make things even more interesting, there are different types of antibodies, each with its own specialized function.
It's like a whole team of antibody superheroes, each with its unique superpower.
I like that analogy. One of the most common antibody classes is IgG.
Oh,
It's found in your blood and tissues
mm-hmm.
and is a master of neutralization, opsonization, and complement activation.
Right.
IgG is also the only antibody class that can cross the placenta from mother to fetus,
Mm.
giving those newborns some much-needed protection in those first few months of life.
So IgG is like the versatile, all-around superhero of the antibody world.
Exactly. Then there's IgA,
IgA.
which is found mainly in mucosal secretions like saliva tears and the mucus that lines your respiratory and digestive tracts.
So IgA is guarding the entry points at the front lines where those microbes are trying to sneak in.
That's right. IgA can neutralize microbes at those mucosal surfaces, preventing them from getting into your body in the first place.
Mm.
It's a really important part of our immune defense.
Okay, so we've got IgG, the all-rounder, and IgA, the mucosal guardian. Any other antibody superstars we should know about?
There's IgM, which is the first antibody produced during an immune response,
Mm.
a large molecule and very effective at activating complement.
So IgM is like the first responder quickly calling for backup to fight off the invaders.
Exactly. Then we have IgE, which is involved in allergic reactions and defenses against parasites. It binds to mast cells, which release histamine and other inflammatory molecules when they encounter an allergen or parasite.
Ah, so IgE is the allergy and parasite specialist, although those allergic reactions can be pretty annoying.
They can be, but IgE plays a vital role in protecting us from certain threats.
Right.
And last but not least, there's IgD,
IgD.
which is found in small amounts on the surface of B cells.
Huh.
Its exact function is still somewhat of a mystery, but we think it might be involved in B cell activation.
So IgD is the mysterious member of the antibody team still shrouded in secrecy.
Exactly. Immunology is a constantly evolving field. There's always more to learn. But we do know for sure that antibodies are essential players in our immune defense, working nonstop to keep us safe from all sorts of threats.
It's mind-blowing how much is going on inside our bodies that we don't even realize.
It's true. The immune system is this incredible network of checks and balances, feedback loops, and specialized cells that all work together in perfect harmony.
It really is like an orchestra, each instrument playing its part to create this beautiful, protective symphony.
I love that analogy. But it's important to remember that B cells don't work alone.
Right.
They rely on help from another key player, helper T cells.
Oh, right. Helper T cells, those cytokine-releasing masterminds we talked about earlier.
Wow.
How do they fit into the antibody production process?
Well, when a B cell encounters an antigen, it actually needs confirmation from a helper T cell before it can go into full-blown antibody production mode.
Okay.
It's like a double-check system to make sure the immune response is appropriate and targeted.
So it's like the B cell is saying, hey, I think I found something suspicious, but I need a second opinion before I sound the alarm.
That's a great way to visualize it. The B cell will take in that antigen,
Okay.
break it down,
Uh-huh.
and present it to a helper T cell on a special molecular platform called MHC-T.
MHC2, is that like a molecular stage where the antigen takes center stage for inspection?
You got it.
Yeah.
If the helper T cell recognizes that antigen as a threat, it'll release cytokines that activate the D cell, giving it the green light to differentiate into those plasma cells and start producing antibodies.
It's fascinating how all these different cells are talking to each other and working together.
It really is. This kind of collaboration is especially important for fighting protein antigens.
Is there something different about protein antigens? What makes them special?
Proteins are just more complex than other types of antigens,
Okay.
like carbohydrates or lipids.
Right.
B cells need help from helper T cells to mount a strong antibody response against them.
So proteins are like the tougher enemies that require a more sophisticated immune response. But why are there different classes of antibodies? Earlier you mentioned B cells undergoing class switching. What's that all about?
That's another fascinating aspect of humoral immunity.
Okay.
Initially, B cells produce those IgM antibodies, the first responders we discussed,
Mm-hmm.
but with some help from those helper T cells, they can switch to producing other antibody classes,
Okay.
like IgG, IgA, or IgE, depending on what the threat is and where it's located in the body.
So the B cells are adapting their weapons based on the enemy they're facing. It's like switching from a shotgun to a sniper rifle depending on the target.
That's a great way to think about it. For example, if a pathogen is trying to get in through those mucosal surfaces, helper T cells might encourage B cells to produce IgA antibodies, the mucosal guards.
Yeah.
Or, if a long-lasting systemic response is needed, they might promote the production of IgG antibodies.
The immune system is like a master strategist, always analyzing the battlefield and deploying the best troops for the job.
Absolutely. And there's even more to it.
Wow.
B cells can undergo a process called affinity maturation.
Affinity maturation. What does that involve?
It's like taking those weapons we were just talking about and making them even more accurate. Over time, with repeated exposure to an antigen, B cells can actually produce antibodies that bind more tightly and specifically to that antigen.
So the antibodies are basically becoming expert marksmen.
Exactly. And this affinity maturation is a big reason why booster shots are so important.
Okay.
They re-expose your immune system to an antigen,
Right.
which gives B cells another chance to refine their antibodies and produce even more effective memory cells.
So booster shots are like sending our immune cells back to boot camp to hone their skills and become even more effective.
Okay.
We've spent a lot of time talking about antibodies and B cells.
Mhm.
What about cell-mediated immunity and those T cell assassins? Are we ready to talk about some action?
Let's dive into the world of T cells. Remember, they're the specialists in dealing with threats that antibodies can't easily reach, like viruses or bacteria that are hiding inside our cells.
Right. Those microbes that are hiding out in their cellular fortresses. How do T cells break into those fortresses and eliminate the enemy?
It all starts with T cell receptors.
Okay.
Just like B cells have antibody receptors.
Hmm.
T cells have unique T cell receptors, TCRs, that can recognize specific antigens.
So it's another lock and key scenario.
Yes, but there's a crucial difference.
Hmm.
Unlike antibodies, T cells can't recognize those free-floating antigens.
Right.
They need to have those antigens presented to them on MHC molecules, those wanted posters we talked about earlier.
Right. The wanted posters. But aren't there different types of MHC molecules?
You're right. There are two main classes of MHC molecules,
Okay.
MHCI and MHCII,
Okay.
and they have different roles in T cell activation.
So MHCI and MHCI are like different kinds of wanted posters, each targeting a specific branch of the T cell force.
Exactly. MHCI molecules are found on nearly every nucleated cell in your body.
Okay.
They present antigens that come from inside the cell, such as viral proteins or proteins from intracellular bacteria.
So MHCI is like the cell's way of saying, hey, I'm infected, come and take care of this. But which T cells are responding to these MHCI signals?
Those would be the cytotoxic T lymphocytes, or CTLs, those assassins we talked about.
Right.
CTLs have a special co-receptor called CD8
Okay.
that allows them to recognize antigens that are being presented on MHCI molecules.
Okay, so CTLs are like the elite special forces trained to get inside those infected cells and eliminate the threats from within.
You got it. When a CTL recognizes a foreign antigen being presented on MHC, it binds to that infected cell and releases cytotoxic molecules that essentially punch holes in the cell membrane and trigger programmed cell death.
So it's a very precise strike, taking out the infected cell and the enemy inside.
Exactly. And this process is really crucial for controlling viral infections and stopping the spread of those intracellular bacteria.
MHCI and CTLs are all about taking out those infected cells.
What about MHCI? What's its role?
MHCI molecules are found primarily on antigen-presenting cells, APCs.
Those are the specialized cells we talked about earlier that capture and present antigens to T cells.
Right, the intelligence gatherers of the immune system. But didn't we say B cells are also APCs? They present antigens to helper T cells, right?
That's right. B cells are a type of APC, and they do express MHC T molecules.
Mhm.
Other important APCs include macrophages and dendritic cells.
Okay, so APCs are displaying antigens on MHC-TI. Which T cells are responding to these signals?
MHC-TI molecules primarily interact with helper T cells.
Okay.
Helper T cells have a co-receptor called CD4,
Uh-huh.
and that's what allows them to recognize antigens presented on MHC-TI.
So CTLs are focused on MHC-TI and infected cells, while helper T cells are focused on MHC-TI and APCs.
Got it. What happens when a helper T cell recognizes an antigen presented on MHC-T?
That's when things get interesting. When a helper T cell encounters an antigen on MHC-TI,
Yeah.
it becomes activated
Okay.
and starts releasing those cytokines we talked about.
Cytokines, those molecular messengers that help coordinate the immune response.
Yeah.
So the helper T cell is calling for reinforcements. Exactly. The cytokines that helper T cells release can activate a whole range of other immune cells, including B cells, macrophages, and even those CTLs, boosting both humoral and cell-mediated immunity.
It's like the helper T cell is the conductor of the immune orchestra, making sure all the instruments are playing in sync and at the right volume.
That's a great way to think about it. Helper T cells are essential for coordinating and amplifying the immune response to make sure your body has the right defenses in place to fight off a wide range of threats.
This is all incredibly intricate. It makes you appreciate how complex and elegant the immune system really is.
It truly is a remarkable system, and honestly, we've only just scratched the surface of how complex it is.
I know. We could talk about this for days, but I think we've covered a lot of ground today. I feel like I'm starting to understand the basic principles of humoral and cell-mediated immunity.
Absolutely. We've met the key players, from those amazing antibodies to the powerful T cells,
Right.
and we've explored the incredible ways they work to recognize and eliminate threats.
We've talked about neutralization, opsonization, complement activation class, switching, affinity maturation, MHC molecules, co-receptors. It's a lot of information, but I'm starting to see how it all fits together.
It really is like piecing together a giant jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah.
With each piece, we reveal another fascinating part of the immune system's story.
Exactly. And I'm sure our listener is eager to hear more about this story.
I agree. We'll delve deeper into the specific functions of different T cell subsets, explore that fascinating world of cytokines, and even touch on that delicate balance between immune activation and regulation.
That sounds great. I'm ready to hear more about the T cell team and what they bring to the table. All right, we're back, and I'm ready to hear more about those T cells.
They're quite the fascinating bunch. We've already talked about helper T cells, those cytokine-releasing masterminds,
Right.
and cytotoxic T lymphocytes, or CTLs, those precision assassins of the immune system. But the world of T cells is much more diverse than that.
So there are even more specialized T cells out there. What other types are on this cellular task force?
Well, we've already discussed helper T cells, also known as CD4 plus T cells, because they have that CD4 co-receptor. But did you know there are actually different subtypes of helper T cells? Each one has its own unique set of cytokines and functions.
So it's like the helper T cell branch has its own specialized units, kind of like, a SWAT team, a bomb squad, and a hostage negotiator all working together.
That's a great analogy. You've got Th1 cells, for instance.
Okay.
They're essential for activating macrophages and boosting that cell-mediated immunity against those sneaky intracellular pathogens. They release cytokines like interferon gamma, which basically supercharges those macrophages.
So Th1 cells are like the macrophage coaches, giving them that extra boost they need to win the fight.
That's a good way to put it.
Yep.
Then you've got Th2 cells.
Th2, okay.
They're more involved in humoral immunity and responses against parasites. They release cytokines like IL-4, which helps B cells produce those IgE antibodies, the parasite specialists we talked about earlier.
Okay, so Th1 cells are all about that direct cell-to-cell combat, while Th2 cells are supporting the antibody-mediated attack. It's amazing how they divide and conquer. What other helper T-cell subtypes are there?
We also have Th17 cells.
T70.
They play a big role in recruiting neutrophils and fighting off extracellular bacteria and fungi. They release IL-17, which is like a beacon for neutrophils, attracting them to the site of infection.
So Th17 cells are like the emergency dispatchers, sending out the call for those neutrophil first responders.
Exactly. And then there are follicular helper T cells, or TFA cells for short.
TFI.
These are crucial for helping B cells produce those high-affinity antibodies and develop into memory cells.
So TFH cells are like the mentors for those B cells, helping them train and become even more effective antibody producers.
That's a great way to visualize it. They hang out on those follicles of the lymph nodes, which is where B cells mature and undergo class switching and affinity maturation.
Okay, so we've got Th1, Th2, Th17, and TF cells, each with its own specialized role. It's quite the impressive team. But what about those regulatory T cells we mentioned earlier? They weren't part of the helper T cell group, right?
You're right. Regulatory T cells, or TREGs, are their own unique lineage of T cells.
Okay.
They're essential for keeping the immune system in check and preventing it from going overboard.
The peacekeepers of the immune system, making sure everyone stays calm and doesn't cause any unnecessary damage.
Precisely. TREGs express the CD4 co-receptor, just like helper T cells. But they also express this special transcription factor called FOXP3, which gives them their suppressive superpowers.
So it's like they're helper T cells with a built-in off switch.
Exactly. TREGs can actually dampen the activity of other immune cells, including those helper T cells and CTLs, ensuring that the immune response is balanced and doesn't start attacking our own tissues.
It's incredible how the immune system has these internal checks and balances to keep everything running smoothly. But what happens when those checks and balances go haywire?
That's when things can go wrong, and we can develop autoimmune diseases.
Right.
In these cases, the immune system mistakenly attacks our own cells and tissues.
Right, we talked about that earlier. It's almost like the immune system gets confused and starts seeing our own cells as the enemy.
Exactly. There are many different types of autoimmune diseases, each affecting different organs or systems. Some common examples include rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, and type 1 diabetes.
So in these cases, are the TREGs just not doing their job properly? Or are there other things going on?
It's likely a combination of factors. There can be genetic predispositions, environmental triggers, and even infections that can mess with immune regulation and lead to autoimmunity.
It sounds like a really complex area of research, but it's clear that understanding how TREGs work is essential for developing new treatments for these autoimmune diseases.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Scientists are working hard to find ways to either boost TREG activity or suppress the activity of those immune cells that are causing damage. It's a really exciting area of research.
This has been an incredible journey through the immune system. It's so much more intricate than I ever imagined.
It truly is a marvel of biology.
Mm-hmm.
And the most amazing part is that it's all happening inside you right now, constantly protecting you from countless threats.
It really makes you appreciate how much we rely on this incredible system.
I think we've given our listener a solid foundation for understanding the basics of immunity today.
We've explored the ancient origins of immunity, delved into the intricacies of antibodies and T cells, and even touched on that delicate balance of immune regulation. It's been quite a deep dive.
It has, and remember, this is just the beginning. There's so much more to discover about this fascinating field.
I'm definitely feeling inspired to learn more. And to our listener, thank you for joining us on this incredible journey through the immune system. We hope you've enjoyed exploring this amazing world within your own body.